joined by Pete Dougherty here at Lambeau Field, where the Packers have fallen 27-10 to the New York Jets. Pete, um, it should be stated that this New York Jets team is on the rise under Robert Saleh and with Mike LaFleur. This is not your daddy's Jets team. Well, it may be, depending on how old your dad is. But this is a different Jets team than we've seen the past few years. This is also a different Packers team than we've seen the past 3 years.
You know, it's funny, now that you say that, I don't know if the Jets started 0-2 or 1-2, but I remember reading that, like, a lot of criticism, you know, same old Jets, and it just shows you how fast things turn in the NFL and how things can look bleak and, you know, turn out a lot better, or vice versa. This was a really bad performance by the Packers. I mean, this game felt a little bit like the 2018 game against Arizona where they lost here and Mike McCarthy got fired like 3 hours after the game. Now, Matt LaFleur's not getting fired.
Okay.
I mean, he just signed a contract. So the circumstances are totally different. But this game had the same kind of feel where just nothing worked and they just got kicked around on their own home field. Very, you know, unexpected that they get thumped like that here.
If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Questions, concern, grievances. We have an airing of grievances here on our Packers News. It is. We need to celebrate something. It's Festivus here on Packers News. But as you said, just a complete lack of anything going, really. It's not even so much that the Jets won, because as we said, the Jets were on an upward trajectory. They've got a lot of talent. Zach Wilson has improved. Breece Hall is such a good running back. Sauce Gardner was all over the place today. But it was the Packers' inability to do anything. It was the Jets beating them and the Packers beating themselves. Is that safe to say?
Well, the Jets dominate. The Jets' defensive line dominated the line of scrimmage for the most part. Got a lot of pressure, rushing 4, thumped the run game quite a bit. They were getting push on the line. That was a big place where this game was won and lost, was on the line. Really curious to see how the Packers react to this. Of course, I was thinking the same thing last week. Really curious to see how they react to this and what, if any, changes, personnel, anything else that comes out of it.
There were some changes on defense today, which we're going to get into here in a second. But first, let's get back to the trenches. This is a trenches league, Pete, and they just got whooped up front. You know, I think Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon had 19 carries between them. I think around 26 touches total, which is not bad, not as much as you want, but not bad. But it doesn't make a difference if Aaron Jones is getting the ball and immediately getting blown up by Quinnen Williams.
Yeah, I thought Quinnen Williams just kind of eyeballing the game, was maybe the best guy in the field, the most dominant player in the field. The Jets just dominated up front, and it was interesting hearing LaFleur and Rodgers' comments. LaFleur basically said everything's on the table as far as personnel changes, and Rodgers kept coming back to simplify. He wants them to simplify things on offense. He thought when they moved the ball tonight, things were simpler. I think he's talking about when they went faster tempo, and so maybe they were calling simpler stuff. But he must have come back 5 or 6 times to simplify. So that's going to be his message with LaFleur. I don't know if LaFleur will agree or disagree with them. But that was a horrendous offensive. They're just groping for anything to work on offense. They can't find anything to work.
Yeah, to your point, I think the 2-minute drive at the end of the first half, which was really more of like a 40-second drive, that was their best offensive drive of the day to get into position to give Mason Crosby a chance to get some points on the board, which they did. And then again, the drive that ended with an Allen Lazard touchdown, it was sort of the same thing. You know, just simple, quick throws, get the ball out to the sideline, let them work. Is that the key here?
Well, I'm not sure what the key is. I mean, it's still, you know, their 2 best guys are Jones and Dillon. Their best guy is Jones, and he had 4 touches at halftime, 3 runs and a catch. I realize, you know, look, if teams are really stuffing the run, you can't just keep, you know, running into it and facing 3rd and 8 every time. But there are other ways to get them the ball: screens, swing passes. You know, put both backs in there, line him up as a wing back, and do the jet sweep with him, with Jones. So there are ways to get them the ball, but they're just groping right now for anything that'll work. And I think one thing that we'll all be looking for is, will Yosh Nijman be the right tackle next week and Jenkins move to guard? It's got to be at least on the table, you would think.
Yeah, rough day for Jenkins and Josh Myers and Royce Newman. Rough day.
Newman got benched in the second quarter. Hansen came in for like a series or 2, got hurt. So Newman goes back in. They're really struggling now. that might be a pretty decent Jets team. That defense might be pretty good, but still, if you're going to win a title in this league, you got to be able to have a better offensive performance than we just saw against a good defense.
Let's go to a couple of questions here. We're just going to kind of start, like I said, a lot of comments, people upset. Air it out. Craig says, and the schedule gets tougher for the next 3 weeks, too. I don't know if I would argue that necessarily with the Commanders, but Taylor Heineke, as we said, almost beat them on this field last year.
He did.
And so when they are going to the Commanders, as you said after the last week's loss, you want to see how they respond. Robert Tunyon had a good quote to me in the locker room after the game. He said, this is the sort of week where you figure out who you are as a team. What do the Packers figure out this week?
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of thinking that was last week, but now they'll really figure it out. An interesting thing Roger said was, because I asked him, so are you guys in crisis? And he asked me to find it, and I said, well, things seem kind of wobbly. And he said, well, it all depends on what happens in the locker room, and if guys stick together, then he thinks they're fine. But if there's some splintering, then they've got big problems.
Matt says, and this kind of builds off that, legitimate question, are the Packers a bad team or just not very good? I feel like those are two different distinctions.
Well, today they were a bad team. The second half last week, they were a bad team. So that's 6 quarters. That's a lot. It's, you got to take more than that to say, yes, they're a bad team. But I feel like they're on the ropes right now. It's funny in the online chat that I did this week. I was talking about, if they had lost to Tampa in that game down there, and so they'd have been 1-2. I'd have said, so what? Early, they're finding their way. Last week after that Giants game, it didn't feel like so what. And this week feels like there's no way this is so what. They have real issues. They need a lot of things to go well. They need players to develop fast. They need Watson and Watkins to get healthy and play and not get hurt again, which I don't think they can bank on that. So there's a lot of issues going on. I wouldn't call them a bad team yet, but they have been bad the last 6 quarters. So.
Yeah. With that in mind, Louise Fisher asked, do you think they look for a wide receiver or other positions tonight? We're coming up on the trade deadline, Pete.
Couple weeks, right?
I mean, you're not going to get OBJ right now, or at least not to be any sort of he's not going to make any sort of impact right now. But do you go after someone else?
I think they need to trade for somebody. Yeah. Now I don't know who they can get. They have limitations. They got $6 million in cap room, and they need to keep some of that for other moves this season. So I don't know. They have $2 or $3 million to work with probably. I think they need to go trade for somebody. Yeah.
I said that in our pregame Facebook Live. Someone asked if they go after a free agent receiver, and I said I don't know about a free agent, but I wouldn't. I would keep my eye out for a trade.
Yeah.
Is that the better possibility?
Yeah, and there are guys out there who have, because they had contract restructures or whatever, who are guys who are accomplished in this league. They've made their share of plays, and their base salary is like $1.5 million, and they've already been paid, a third of it already. So they could afford guys like that. It's just what it would cost. It's going to cost a draft pick.
Yeah. And Antoine asked about DJ Moore specifically. I mean, is that someone to watch out for that's on your radar at least?
Sure. Now, I don't know if they're going to trade him or not because he's young. He's 25, I think. And, so I'm not sure that they'll trade him. But there were a couple other guys that I'm just blanking on everybody. I just wrote a column about this last week. But there were 4 or 5 guys who came to mind. Cooks down in Houston was one possibility. And I think I think his base salary was reasonable, or they could even, as long as they could fit under the cap initially, they could restructure and get some extra cap room. But yeah, there are guys. Now they're not going to get a great player, but they can get a guy who's better than what they've got. Guys who were probably better than Watkins, for instance. I think they could find somebody who's better than Watkins.
Alan says no offensive or defensive adjustments. I'm going to take a question off, or I'm going to add a question to that comment. Jair Alexander said this week that they had a flawless plan defensively, and in the first half it looked pretty dang good, Pete. We saw a lot more man coverage. Yeah. We saw Jair Alexander going into the slot so that he could follow Garrett Wilson, and when he did, Rasul Douglas went outside. They seemed to adjust. Eric Stokes said after the game that they tried to run a crossing route early, and he made sure that they didn't get far on it. He's like, there was no way they were beating us on those crossing routes for 2 weeks in a row. Then in the second half, passing defense still sort of held up, but Breece Hall just ran dirty, and they had 3 huge plays on one drive to kind of get that touchdown off of the reverse. That I think it was, a 20-yard touchdown or something like that. All of that to say, let's look at defense first. Better step forward, or was it just a mirage this first half, and the fact that the adjustment still didn't come in the second half, or this is the answer?
Good question. Good way to put it. I think a little better, but they cracked because the game was they were still in the game in the fourth quarter, and they cracked. And they gave up points when they had to absolutely get stops. So I guess, you know what, that probably means they weren't any better. You know, the first half did look better. You know, they were, as you said, they were doing more man. They were doing more jamming at the line of scrimmage. But the second half, it was just kind of reverted back to the run. They just couldn't stop the run at all. I mean, that last drive, they just ran the ball right down their throat, and they knew what was coming. So they cracked, and that's a bad sign. You know, the questions about Joe Barry, he didn't answer any of them, you know.
Is the crack, in your opinion, on the players or on the coaching?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I lean towards I think there's a lot of talent there. Maybe we've many of us have overestimated their talent.
I don't think we have.
That could be but right now I still lean that there's something with their way they're using guys, with the way they're coaching them, that is just they haven't figured out how to get the most out of the talent that they have.
Okay, offensive adjustments. We saw in the first half, you know, they tried to get Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon involved more. The Jets were just kind of shutting it down, so they went to Robert Tonyan. I think I heard that this was the most catches a tight end has ever had in a single game in Packers history. I think he ended with 10 for 90 yards. So that being said, do you feel like there was a lack of adjustments on the offensive side in the ball, especially in the second half, or was it more Rodgers, which we will get into in more detail here in just a minute?
You know, they must have made some adjustments, but whatever they were, they didn't work, and they weren't obvious to my naked eye watching the second half. So, you know, whatever they tried didn't work. So I guess it was poor adjusting by the offensive staff. They're just, they're just groping for anything that'll work on offense. I mean, that was one of the worst offensive performances I've seen, you know, covering this team since 1993. Wow. I mean, I don't know if it was the worst, but I remember there was a 6-3 game in Philadelphia back in probably about, 97, somewhere in there. Yeah. But man, this was really, really rough.
Bonnie asked, how is Aaron Rodgers feeling after so many hard hits and an injured thumb? Pete, do you think the thumb had a lot to do? I mean, let's be honest, and this is the nicest way to say it. He threw some ducks today.
He did. So LaFleur was asked about it, and he heaped a lot of praise on Rodgers for gutting it out and all of that. And then he was asked, so was that a big factor? And then LaFleur said, well, I can't say that because then it sounds like we're making excuses. So, you know, no. But his initial statement made it sound like it probably was a factor. Rodgers was that first thing he was asked. He said, you know, how's the thumb? He said, okay. Did it affect you? Yeah, maybe on a couple throws, but not more than that. And he just kind of left it at that. So it sounds like it was a factor, but I find it hard to believe it was a deciding factor in this game.
Robert says the 2-minute drive was against a prevent defense. Is that fair to say?
No, it is. Yeah. So that that made it easier, and they had a good drive in the third quarter. I think it was the third quarter where they, moved the ball some. So maybe that's the drive Rodgers was talking about more than the one in the at the end of the half.
Craig asked, why don't they ever throw the slant instead of long downfield? It felt like they tried to get the slant going today with Romeo Doubs, and Sauce Gardner just had him locked up.
Yeah, and they threw one to Lazard, didn't that got broken up? I think
also by Gardner.
Yeah, and maybe he caught one of them too. They're just they don't know. They have no idea who they are right now, and the thing that's troubling about that is they knew their personnel had changed going into the season. And that we're 6 weeks in, and things are getting worse and not better, I think is a really big red flag.
Brad asked, who's going to want to come to this team?
If they get traded, they don't have any say in it. So if they want to get paid, they'll show up.
Yeah. Jason says the offense needs to get better because the defense can't always carry us, and I think we need some more wide receiver help. That being said, in the first half, it felt like, when the offense was floundering, the defense was playing well, and then it flipped in the second half. They have yet to play a full 4 quarters as a complementary team.
Yeah, and, to be fair, this is the NFL. That's really hard to do, and how often does anybody play a full 4 quarters, where they play really well on both sides of the ball? It doesn't happen that often, but they've had way too much bad football on both sides of the ball. So, no, this is, they've got to be in crisis mode. I mean, it's early, 6 games in, there's a lot to go. If some guys,
a third of the way through the season.
yeah, if some guys develop, if they figure some things out, they still have, Rodgers is still a really good quarterback. They got a lot of talent and some key places on defense. It's not like their season's over, but if I'm them, they have to be feeling a lot of pressure right now. They've got to be feeling like they got to be in crisis mode right now. I bet Matt LaFleur, I wouldn't be surprised if right now he's watching that game film.
He may not go home tonight.
I bet if he does, it won't be till midnight.
Yeah. Lindell asked, he essentially wants to know, how hot is Joe Barry's seat?
It's getting hotter. I wouldn't be – the Packers don't make in-season moves very often, but if things don't improve a lot before the season is over, it wouldn't be stunning to see a move made there because they do have Jerry Gray on staff, who's been a coordinator in this league. We haven't seen enough of LaFleur to know if he'd actually pull the trigger in season, but super high expectations for this team. They brought back Aaron Rodgers at $50 million a year to contend for a Super Bowl, and they are so far from that right now. If things are still looking this shaky and wobbly, when we get a little past the halfway point, I'd say all bets are off.
I'm just going to stir the pot here a little bit. Think about this, Pete. In your opinion, what's the best defensive game the Packers played last season?
Oh, I don't know if I can. I barely remember last year. It was somewhere. They had that really nice stretch in the middle of the season. Was it maybe at Kansas City? Was that their best game? Even though they lost that game, going against Patrick Mahomes, that was pretty impressive. Off the top of my head, that's the one that stands out most. I'm not sure if it was.
I'd put Arizona up there.
Oh yeah, that was.
Who called the defensive plays in that game?
That's right, because Joe Barry had coronavirus.
Yeah, so like I said, just stirring the pot, something to think about. We're gonna take a couple more questions here. Noah asked, and I know you addressed this, but we're gonna let you get into it a little bit more. Noah asked, why don't they move Yash to right tackle? Is that a good first move?
I'm thinking there's a pretty good chance that happens. Now, there seem to be some people who follow this team, who cover this team, who think that the Packers think that he's not a very good right tackle. He played there in college. It's just the interior of their line has been a problem, and Jenkins is a really, really good guard. So they got to decide whether Jenkins at guard and Nyman at right tackle is a better combination than Newman at guard and Jenkins at tackle. If I had to make a guess right now, I'm guessing that they do come out with Nyman at right tackle, but that's just a guess.
We have a lot of comments and questions asking if they should go to Jordan Love. Is that reactionary?
Yes. I mean, there's no way, and they're paying Aaron Rodgers $50 million a year. There's zero chance that they'll make a change there. But I mean, this is adding ammo for some of us who thought they should have gotten what they could for him last February or March.
Last thing, Pete, take a step closer to me too. There we go. Last thing, we've talked a lot about over the first few weeks how much better special teams has looked. Special teams had 2 big mishaps today. There was a blocked field goal. I asked Mason Crosby about it afterwards. He said operation felt fine, snap felt fine. Coming off his foot, he said it felt fine, and then he was kind of shocked to hear the second pop. That may have just been Quinnen Williams getting his hand up in there. That was a good play, more so than a bad field goal, I would say.
I don't know if looking at the replay, I couldn't tell if the kick was low. LaFleur said he thought the snap was high, so he thought that slowed the operation down. But they did seem to get some penetration. It was right up the gut, where the 2 guys got in there and one of them got their hand on it.
And then Packers were able to get a block punt off of the Jets and recover it and give the offense the ball back at the 36-yard line, and they did nothing with it after Rodgers took a sack.
They did worse than nothing.
They did negative.
They moved backwards. Yes.
And then Pat O'Donnell, who has sort of been the MVP, got a punt blocked. It wasn't really his fault. A defender was able to kind of get up in there. Asked Dallin Levitt after the game, what happened there, because Dallin Levitt was the PP, and he said he needed to go back and watch it. He kind of deferred all of the details. I need to watch the play. I need to watch the play. I need to watch the play. And then I specifically asked him again, was it miscommunication or a missed assignment? Like, what was it? A pre-snap problem or a post-snap problem, essentially. And he said again, I need to go back and watch the tape. All of that to say, and we also saw Keyshawn Nixon on kickoff returns. He looked good, in my opinion. He had a 32-yard return out of the end zone. All of that to say, the blocked field goal and the blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown, is that a concern? Do you say, oh, same old Packer special teams, or was that sort of an anomaly for what the special teams unit has become? They've been pretty good overall up until that, but I don't see the future. I can't see the future, so I don't know how it's going to go. What I saw on the block punt was there was a guy lined up over 58, and then a guy looped around him, and 58 stayed inside, and Levitt behind him moved inside, so there was a huge gap for the guy to go through. One of those two was supposed to block him. I don't know which one. And all of that to say, he came right up the middle, right through the gap, and was able to block him. Not much you can do there. And they were already so deep into their own territory that it was a pretty easy return for a touchdown. Looked a lot like that 49ers return last year during the playoff game.
Yeah, those are killers. I mean, it's just free 7 points, and then the Packers get their block and they get nothing out of it. I mean, that's game's turn on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a 14-point swing in a 17-point game. Throw in the missed field goal as well. It's a 17-point swing in a 17-point game. And then there was just a lot of bad football where these are the kind of things where last year they were good enough to overcome it. They still would have put up the points, and this year they're just groping unsuccessfully to find anything that'll work on offense. Well, Pete, I know you've got a lot to write about. I do too. We're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to have full wall-to-wall coverage for you on PackersNews.com, wrapping up this 27-10 loss to the New York Jets, and figuring out where the Packers go from here as they get ready to head to Washington, D.C. to take on the Commanders. Commanders. Ooh, I get that wrong every time, and I need to get it right before we head there this week.
Is Vanderbilt, are they the Commodores?
They are the Commanders. Yeah. The word all looks the same. Anyways, as I said, we'll have full coverage for you on PackersNews.com, wrapping up the Packers